Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Unfollowing Mum. Thank you so much for being here. Today I have a really exciting guest who's going to share her lived experience story with us. She is Jemma Wilson, somebody I have met online. Hi Jemma.
Hiya.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you are going to chat about today?
I'm not that interesting, I'm so sorry, but I am Jemma Wilson, as you've just said. I used to be a blogger, which is how I come across you, Harriet. That life for me didn't quite work, so now I'm still trying to write things, and I am an amateur photographer as well. I live in Kent. I've got two children, a 9-year-old girl and a 13-year-old teenager boy.
Oh, it's the
oh, they're a teenager now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I live with them, just them and my puppy, who is a nightmare, but keeps us all on our toes. So
Don't
yeah,
tell me that. I've got puppy fever. I want a puppy
I'd say
soon.
do it. They're cute, but he's effort.
Yeah, we've been without our dogs for nearly a year now, and both me and my eldest are like, can we get a puppy? Can we get a puppy? And my husband's like, dude, come on, really?
Yeah.
You're the adult as well. Can you
I'm just
kind of
waiting
back
for
me
him
up
to
here?
settle down and calm
Yeah.
himself down. So, but yeah, that's me. And I'm just coming to really, I've listened to all of your episodes so far and have got my own lived in experience of parental estrangement with my mother. So I thought I'd come and have a chat with you today about that.
That's brilliant. And I think for me, one of the things that I really wanted to do on this podcast was try and share other people's lived experiences because I feel like it's such an isolating experience. And you kind of
Yeah.
feel like no one else is going through it. I must be the
Until
only
I
one.
heard your initial talking bits and bobs about it. I mean, I followed you when your experience was that you were building the annex,
Mm.
and to then hear that everything went completely sideways for you, I was thinking, okay, well, I didn't think that anybody else was sharing the same experience or a similar experience. And then as soon as the pod came out, I was like, okay, there's other people that are sharing these experiences just like us. So I think it's super important to get that message out there, because you're right in what you said in one of the episodes about it being still very taboo. It's very much how can you make someone in your life disappear who is your biological parent? Like, people
Yeah.
don't understand it, and there's always a huge backstory, and there's always a huge story behind everybody's experiences. So I think it's super important.
There is always a big backstory. And I think one
Mm.
of the biggest misconceptions about estrangement, and I know I've said this time and time again, is that it's kind of just done flippantly, or it's done because you've thrown your toys out the pram and
Yeah.
you're like, I'm going to cut you off. You wake up one morning and go, do you know what? Don't feel like having a mum anymore. Can you imagine? It's so bizarre that people think that way, because if you look at a breakdown in a relationship with a partner, or when you
Mhm.
become distant, they talk about a friendship cycle being about 7 years,
Mm.
and that most people stay friends for about 7 years and then gently drift into different
Mhm.
phases of their lives, because that's what happens. We grow, we change, we develop.
Yeah.
Our friends get into other things, they change jobs, they move away. All of those are perfectly normal, and they're seen
Mhm.
as a part of life, part of a cycle. If you have a breakdown in a relationship with a partner, it's seen as, okay, well, they've grown apart, this has happened, this is done, maybe there's been something that's gone on, and it's all accepted. But when it
Mm.
comes to a parent,
Yeah.
it's like, no, she must have just woken up one morning and thought, fuck it, I've had enough. I'm not,
It's
no.
it's because it's the parent title. It's a title of someone who is your caregiver. Why would you ever break ties and break a relationship with a caregiver? People just can't seem to get their heads around that. I think that's not on anybody being in ignorant or in anything like that. It's an uneducation. I think certain things need to be educated. A long time ago, mental health wasn't discussed because it was taboo. And then the more people get educated on it, the more people understand about it, the more they're like, okay, actually, I want to hear your story now. But it's not like that with parental estrangement, because not enough people speak about it. It is still a taboo subject. And so the more people that speak about it, the more that you feel less alone as a person experiencing it, but also others then have that understanding and can give you the empathy, or have a conversation with you about it without having that initial judgment that you don't necessarily want,
Yeah.
because there's no reason for it.
There is so much judgment around it. And especially now, I think more and more, and I want to do an episode on this actually, or I might have done an episode on this by the time this comes out. Who knows? But I think the more that we see public figures coming out and talking about it, especially big ones, like we've had recently Jeanette McCurdy, we've had Prince Harry, and we've had Britney Spears all talking about toxic family dynamics. And I've noticed more and more that the word estrangement is being used in media, but depending on whether or not that public figure is in favour, depends on whether or not it's picked up in a positive light, as seen as, oh, they were protecting themselves from this awful person, poor person, or they've cut off their family, how awful. And it really depends on how that person's perceived. But
I mean, ultimately, you said about Jeanette McCurdy. Her whole book title is like, she's glad her mother died. And then you have Prince Harry with his title is just Spare, and it's just hinting at the estrangement side of everything. Effectively, you'd look at those two book titles and think, oh my goodness, how could she say that? But everyone's absolutely on her side, which is warranted. But because she's flavour of the month, it's not the same for Prince Harry, because he's disliked by a large amount of the population at the moment, but their stories and their experiences are very, very similar. And they should both be carried with that level of empathy that comes from having to cut people out of your life. It's not an easy decision to make. It's never an easy decision to make. I've likened it a lot to grief. I feel like you're saying goodbye, not to the mum you had growing up if you had a nice childhood, not to the parent that you had who maybe got you through a tough time. You're saying goodbye to that image of that person. My biological mum, my mum, I've got a stepmom, so I find it tricky of what to entitle someone with, but she's still walking around in the town I live in, but that's not my mum. I've grieved for that mum. The mum that's walking around is not her. It's a huge loss. It's not a decision that comes, like you say, you don't wake up and go, what am I going to do today? I'm really bored. I know what I'll do. I'll just bin my mum off today. You don't do that. Yeah, like I didn't think I'd get to 30 in my 30s and not have a mum. Like I never thought that would be the case, and it wasn't a decision that I came to lightly in the slightest.
Yeah, and it's that not having a mum by choice that I feel is so judged and so heavily criticized, because how could you make this choice? So when did you become estranged?
I couldn't give you, I was looking at this and I couldn't give you an exact date. I remember, I think it was Helen on her podcast, she couldn't give an exact date or anything, or when she, stopped calling her, or whatever the dates are. I don't think I can ever pull it down to a date, but I definitely cut ties completely a good few years ago. I was in my 30s, definitely in my 30s. I think I've tried over the last 6-7 years to sort of try and see if she'd like a relationship again, which is on me. It's just because I feel like benefit of the doubt, just maybe she made a mistake and she didn't mean to be how she is, but I think the crux date for me is the 27th of September 2013, which I know is very precise for someone who's just said there's no precise date. And I know it's that date because that is my daughter's date of birth.
Okay, and what happened then?
So there's obviously a story leading up to it, but the 27th of September 2013 is the day that I had my daughter, sent my mum a text to say she's born, like a baby's here, this is her name, this is her weight, this is the time she was born, and I never got a reply. So I sent a couple more, did you get my message? And her response was to say, why have you given her those names? It wasn't a congratulations, it wasn't a well done, proud of you, it was never that anyway, but it was none of that. It was just, why have you given her those names? My daughter's named after my grandma and my her dad's grandma, so my mum would have known that. It was just a way of starting a row, and I'd said, this is why, these are the names that we've chosen. And she said, well, I want her to call me Nanny. And we'd had many previous conversations about my son not calling her that, because as far as I'm concerned, the title of Nanny, if you're going to be sporadically in and out of my children's lives, is a title that needs to be earned. And yes, I said, well, no, we've discussed this, Mum, this is a title that needs to be earned. You need to be present in my kids' lives a bit more. And she said, F off out of my life then. On the day I had my daughter, I'd had my daughter at 1:45 in the morning, and this was a conversation happening at 9:30 in the morning. So she wasn't even a day old. And I was like, okay, we're done. we're done. There's many things, experiences leading up to that. This isn't obviously the start of her story, my story, but ultimately that is the end of our story. That started the beginning of the end for me. As I say, I did try from then on to try and continue a relationship, form a new relationship. I don't know, but ultimately it wasn't ever going to be that way. She's not a confirmed alcoholic. I don't know how you say that in a medical term. She wouldn't say she's an alcoholic, but she is alcohol dependent.
Okay.
And a lot of her decisions are made based on alcohol, unfortunately, and not her family or her grandchildren. So yeah, that's
Yeah, it sounds like a really traumatic experience to be putting yourself out there to somebody who you already have a really fractured relationship with, especially when you're vulnerable because you've just given birth. You want that. It's almost giving them the option to giving them the opportunity to give you that response that you needed in that moment of, well done, I'm really proud of you, or just to show something that might fit with what you need as the child, even though you're an adult yourself.
No, that's your mum, isn't it?
Yeah, something that you would need from your mum in that moment, and it's just thrown back at you. And I think so many people who have tried to offer the olive branch, because I get this, why have you not extended the olive branch? And it's so many people who have, and so many people who do have the same story of it being thrown back at them because that person is not getting their own way. And you mentioned then that she's had a lot of problems with alcohol. I'd spoken to Helen Rabbit on the podcast before, and you've mentioned Helen's episode. And Helen grew up with an alcoholic mother who was a confirmed alcoholic, who was diagnosed, who needed hospitalization. And it almost adds an additional layer to that, because then it's, well, you've got this disease and you need to be more empathetic to her struggles, but that's not your responsibility as the child of the person behaving this way.
I mean, my mum's, I keep trying to look back at my childhood and think, do I remember her having an issue with alcohol? And I honestly, I couldn't tell you. It's not a conversation I've had with my dad, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I know that this whole spiral kind of stemmed from my dad leaving my mum. A very good relationship with my dad, I will just put that out there now. I'm a massive daddy's girl. I've got an amazing stepmum, so I'm not missing out. I'm not lacking in anything like that. But my dad left and made it very clear that he would still be seeing us, which is exactly what happened. 50-50 co-parenting worked absolutely perfectly. But when he wasn't there, when we would be with my mum, I've got a smaller, younger sister and brother who are a few years younger than me. And
are you the eldest?
I am.
Okay. I speak to a lot of people who are either only children or who are the eldest.
And it's the second he left. It was the night that they broke up. He'd said to her, like, let's keep this between us while we sort things, and let's not tell the children. And I could hear them rowing, and I remember going to the top of the stairs and being like, looking down, what's going on? And then my dad coming out and him going straight to the bathroom on my right, and my mum saying, he's leaving us now. And he'd said, don't say to the children, and she's shouting up the stairs that he's leaving us. And I thought, well, he wouldn't, it's my dad. And he obviously came and explained everything a lot more, and he was like, that's not what's happening. But from that moment, I mean, within 2 weeks, she was out every night. We were all school age, primary school age, when they started to break up. I was in secondary school by the time they did. And she was out every night. We're on a meter for electric and gas. We'd have no hot water, no heating. I made it really clear when I've been talking about this to other people, to therapists, and when I spoke to you initially, I'm in no way, shape or form under the illusion that we were safe. We weren't safe. And we should have absolutely been in social care or in the care of my dad full time. I don't know why I never spoke to anyone about it. I don't know why I told anybody the situation we were in. But we were neglected children, and we would have been fully neglected had it not been for me, which sounds so super big-headed. I know it does, but
no, it doesn't.
I was a parent at 13, basically. I was parenting and looking after 2 children because she couldn't, and my dad wasn't around to do so. My dad has since found out about this and is obviously not overly impressed that I didn't tell him any of it. But I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't tell you why. Protection, maybe protecting her. Still my mum. I don't know. But we were very much neglected children because she was alcohol dependent. You know, we'd have, what do you call them? The provident man used to come to the door every week, where she'd have a loan, like a doorstop loan, and he'd come and knock on the door, and I'd have to hide the children. We'd have no electric, no gas, no food. I'd be getting them ready for school. She'd bring random men home, and I'd have to sort of just keep the children away. And that's not a childhood. You've lost out on a whole child. So I don't know if there was a sort of resentment there from a young age for me that I just buried deep down, which makes me, you said about people saying, why didn't you try harder, why did you make this rash decision? I feel like I really did. I feel like I did everything I possibly could to keep that line of relationship open. And maybe I look like a bit of a muppet, a bit of a mug, going, I keep trying, and she keeps saying no. Based on my whole childhood experience with her, really I should have walked away a long time ago.
Yeah,
maybe that's the case, but I didn't, and I continued on with looking after the children and all this sort of stuff. And I mean, my ex-husband, we weren't ready to move in together. He was like, we're going to move in together now, because if we don't, I don't think you'll ever leave here, and I think you're going to be here forever, looking after the two children, being her parent almost. And he took me away from that. I mean, it didn't stop anything. If anything, it made her resent him because he took her security away. But it needed to happen. I mean, 2 weeks after he took me away, I had a phone call with my sister screaming down the phone that my mum had put her hand through the glass door in the front room because she was off her head on alcohol and had thought my sister was stuck in the front room. So she'd gone to just push the door and put her hand through, and she cut all of her arm to shreds. It was so many experiences that now if I tell people those things, they go, my God, how were you still even talking to her in your 20s, let alone in your 30s? And there's this split of people that go, okay, I get that, but your dad had left, and she had turned to alcohol. You should have taken that into consideration.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking, but she also had 3 children. She had 3 children to look after, and she didn't do that. She didn't do that at all. I didn't have a childhood. I didn't have a teenagehood, if you like. I didn't have any of that. So the fact that I kept going till I was in my 30s seems to me, I didn't do too badly, really, considering I probably could have kicked her out of my life a long time ago for the things that I was put through.
You didn't do too badly at all. In fact, I think you did bloody amazing to keep trying, and it speaks to what an empathetic person you are, and to what a compassionate person you are, and how kind you are, that you actually kept trying and kept reaching forward to her.
I don't have any regrets, and I don't have a relationship with my brother and sister. There's quite a lot of, I think, hidden resentment from them, because I still went on to have 2 children with my childhood sweetheart. I met my ex-husband at school when I was 7, and we were together 17 years. There was a lot of resentment there that I still went on and did those things, and they didn't, and they don't really have a relationship with me now. My sister has a very close relationship with my mum, but my brother sort of flits in between. But we don't have a relationship, and so you've not just removed your mum, you've removed everybody, because they don't get it, and they'll never get it because they weren't put in the position I was put in.
And
so
they
it's not
get it because you protected them from it, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, it was, everything was hidden from them, wasn't it? That was my job. That's how I sort of looked at it. This is my job. I must protect them. And I knew my dad was going through stuff as well. My dad had, left his wife. He'd taken on, as far as I'm aware, he'd taken on all the debts so that she could live comfortably, because he was the one leaving. I see pictures of him now. I think he took us away, and he just looked so thin and poorly. And now I find out that he was really depressed at those moments. And I must have known that deep down. So what I was doing was trying to just protect everybody, protect the children because they're children, protect myself because I don't want to be taken away and put in another home, or have my dad have more pressure on him, protecting my dad because I know he's going through stuff, protect her because she's obviously got this whole divorce stuff and alcoholism and stuff like that. And it boils down to protection. The whole thing boils down to protection. And you use the word empathy. I think I'm really bad at pointing out my strongest strengths. I can tell you all the things that are wrong with me, but my strongest strength is probably empathy. I have a lot of empathy for everybody. for anyone that needs it, that I think deserves it, that I think has a story to tell. I have a lot of empathy, and I want to protect people. I want to make sure people are safe and loved, and basically all the things I probably didn't have.
Do you think that's the people pleaser in you that wants to give your empathy, maybe at the sacrifice of yourself?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And I can hear you say it, and I can hear me say it, but it's not something I'm ever going to be able. I don't think it's something I'm going to be able to change. Maybe in time it will be a love myself a little better than I currently do. But at the moment, my life is the children and the puppy, annoyingly, and just making sure everybody else is okay.
It's
and
funny
that's
when I hear you talk about the children, because you've just mentioned the children there, talking about your children, but that's exactly how you refer to your younger siblings, as the children. So when you say you became the mum from the age of 13, you really did, because you even referenced them as the children, which is how we would refer to our children.
Our own children, yeah.
And that's so common with parentification and parentified children who become the adult, who step into that adult role. And there's so much shame around having a parent who has this alcoholism, who has these problems, who isn't stepping up and fulfilling the role that they want for whatever reason. And then again, having this split in the family, there's so much shame around it that as children, we naturally step into that role to try and fix it all. And you can't fix it all. These are adult problems that a little person here, even at 13, a little person is trying to fix, and it just doesn't work.
No, I think with my son being 13 now, it's something that I really look at and think, goodness, if I, did that today, he'd have no idea. And that's not because, I parent too much or don't give them the freedom and the things you're saying. They're adult problems. These are adult things that need fixing. I don't know how to put electric on a meter at 13. I don't know how to create hot water at 13. I don't know how to magic food out of thin air at 13. So it's just more of a survival and protection type role that you get put into. And I could have, I'm sure there are people out there that may have had a very similar experience where that's how it all started for them, and they thought, no, this isn't okay, and they spoke up. But I honestly, so many people have said to me, why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you say something? And I have no idea.
It's the shame of it.
It probably is the shame of it. It probably is that. I mean, I was being bullied at school. I'd never told anybody about that. I don't know. It is or has always been, I'll just make sure everybody else is okay. And it is detrimental to myself. And I'm trying to sort of put myself, especially now I've completely cut ties with her. I know that it's done, and I know that there's no more empty gestures on my part where I'm just holding out that olive branch and going, please, can we just try and talk? She lost her husband in the last year, and he was very much a alcohol dependent influence in her life as well. There was very little point in anyone trying to get through to either of them for that part of their lives. And once he died, I thought, my God, she must be so lonely, and I'm going to have to reach out because I don't want her to be lonely. Maybe this is the point where she thinks, oh my goodness, I actually want a relationship with Jemma now. Turns out that wasn't it at all. I actually went through my sister and messaged her and said, I don't have any of my mum's numbers. I have no way of contacting her. Is there any way that you can get a message to her that I'd like to speak and to just check in and see how she is and things? And my sister said, I'm not comfortable with giving you her number, but I will ask her for you. And within 5 minutes, she came back to me and said, she said no. And she was very apologetic, my sister. She was, I'm really sorry, I did try. And I said, that's all I needed. I think it was that moment where I thought, no, that is all I needed. Because if she dies tomorrow, I've done everything. I can't ever see a moment now where she'll die and I'll go, oh, but I could have tried harder. She'll go to her grave with regrets. I won't.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I think it was Helen again. I keep going back to Helen's because it just resonated so much with me. Her podcast, when she said, you had your little conversation about when they die and what do you do and things like that. Yeah. I'm very lucky in the sense that I know that my sister and my brother and my mum's family, the small amount that she has contact with, because she has alienated a lot of people from her family too, they'll all deal with that. I probably won't even know when the funeral is, and I don't need to know. It wouldn't be something I turn up at. I've made my peace with it, and like I said to you before, I've grieved. I've grieved for the loss of the person. So if she died tomorrow, I wouldn't grieve for that person because I don't know that person. That's not a person that holds any love in my heart. So there wouldn't be any regret from me whatsoever. And I think that's a really important thing. There's a lot of people out there that have regret still. Maybe I should have tried harder. People say I should have done this. And I think you know when you've tried your hardest. You know when it's becoming detrimental to you and your family, and you deserve better. And there's a switch, there's a moment. I don't know when it comes. I don't know. I couldn't tell you when it came for me, but I just know that I know now I've done everything I possibly can.
Yeah. And you can make your peace with it then. And like you say, then you can move into the grieving phase, because they talk about the different stages of grief, don't they? I think you definitely have that with estrangement, because you're not just grieving, you're not grieving for the person. I think you're grieving for what could have been and what should have been, what you should have had. You're grieving in some ways for yourself, for the loss of your childhood, for the realization that this is never going to be what I need it to be. And I'm going to have to let it go. And we can accept that when we talk about spousal relationships. We can accept that when we talk about other kinds of relationships, but people seem to find it very difficult to accept it when it comes to parental relationships. And the thing is, you can move on once you come to that realization, once you've had that moment where this is not going to change. This is not going to look the way that I need it to look. You can come from that state of denial where you're going, no, okay, if I just try this, if I extend the olive branch, if I just do this, you can come to that point where you go, right, okay, now I'm done. Actually, I am done. And I'm not going to keep putting myself through this. And okay. And then you move into the grief phase of acceptance, of saying, okay. And then you've got your anger. There's so much anger around it as well. I find anger really difficult to navigate, because I sometimes think, if I just take the lid off being so angry that this was my experience, I'll never stop being angry.
Yeah. And I don't know you personally, but I'm assuming you're not an angry person in general either. So it's actually quite frightening. I agree. I'm not an angry person either. And it's quite frightening when you think, God, if I let that anger in, I don't actually know what the sort of person I'm going to become is, because that's not who I've ever been. But it is there simmering underneath because of your experiences. It's terrifying to not know how that's going to present itself.
Yeah, it is. It's funny that you talk about it simmering beneath, because it is simmering beneath. We all have anger in us. And I talked to a couple of psychotherapists about this. Helen Villas and Katie McKenna, they do Insight Pod, which talks about narcissistic parents. And I'd spoken to them and said about anger, and they'd said, anger's normal, it's healthy, we all have it. But for me, it doesn't feel healthy. It feels like there's something just there bubbling. And every so often it will rear its head if I'm really pushed with something. But you feel like you could just keep screaming and screaming and screaming.
But never ever find the release. Never ever find
the
release.
That's exactly it.
You've dampened it down for so long that there's now not enough time to get all the anger out. That's what it is. But then it presents itself in different ways. So, I mean, we talk about grief and cutting someone off to the point where you have to grieve for their loss. I still don't think you are 100% ever going to be done with that loss, because there are still times now I'll be overwhelmed with life in general, and I'll think, I could do with a mum cuddle. And I never had that. So what am I actually craving here? I never had a mum that was cuddly. My dad was the cuddly one. So what am I thinking in that moment where I'm going, God, I could do with a mum cuddle right now? You never had it in the first place, Gemma. So what on earth are you craving right now? And maybe it is just the fact that I never, ever, ever had that, let alone that I'll never get it now. I went through between having my son and my daughter, I lost 3 babies. And she knows nothing about those, nothing, because what would be the point? I wouldn't have got any empathy, any sympathy. She would have just, her and my dad lost twins a year after I was born. And I just knowing her how I did or do, it would have just been, oh, well, when I lost the twins, and I didn't need that. I needed a mum and a mum cuddle. And I was very fortunate that I had my ex-husband's mum was just stepped into that role and was just fully supportive and understanding. My dad's a dad. My dad found that all very, very difficult. He couldn't work out why I kept trying to have another baby after I'd gone through such heartache. You've got a son. Why would you need to keep doing it. I think that's 100% a man thing, like a dad thing, I suppose. It's that maternal thing in us that makes us keep going after that. But I wouldn't have had anybody, because I didn't have a mum. I didn't have a dad who fully understood that side of it. I was just very lucky to have a mother-in-law that really did step up and fill that role, because even that, I mean, you should be able to turn to your mum in that situation. You're losing babies. Like, you should be able to call your mum and go, Mum, I'm not okay. But I couldn't do that. So it's fight for yourself or hope that someone else fights with you. So that's what ended up happening. But I don't know, I think there comes a lot of resentment when you're going through certain things in your life and you think, God, I wish I had a mum now. So there's never going to fully be a time where you can effectively just cut it off. I think the only time, which sounds very depressive and low and dark maybe, is that the only time I think I'll ever stop going, oh, I could do with a mum and cuddle or someone to help me in that situation, is when she actually dies. Because it's not an option then. As much as I can say I've cut ties, she's still in my town. She's still down the road. She still gets on a bus sometimes that I'm on, you know. There'll only become a time where I don't crave that, I suppose, when there's nothing to crave. And she's not there anymore.
Even then, I'm not entirely sure, you know. I know that's, and again, that's probably not what anybody wants to hear. People are probably like, God's sake, like, I was hoping, yeah, thanks, love, you're never going to get over it. Sorry. I think it's more, you know, when you talk about the mum cuddle and wanting that, even though you never had it, there is an instinct in us as biological beings that we crave that affection, that closeness from our primary caregiver. And when they're not capable of giving it, it doesn't mean we crave it any less. It doesn't mean that our brains go, yeah, they're not going to do that. We internalize it and we go, there must be something wrong with us that they're not giving us that. And I know in my experience, my mum was very affectionate, but then would weaponize it.
Okay.
So I remember her being brilliant when I had a miscarriage, and then I'd found that I was pregnant, even though I was on birth control, when Edith was about 6 months old. I wasn't doing very well as it was and chose to have a termination. And I remember going through that experience, my mum being very much, I'm so here for you, with a side of, but your husband's not, just so that she could kind of dig that in there.
Okay.
But then years later, I remember having a conversation with her, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was. And I said something, and she'd said, I can't remember how it came about, but I said something that must have really upset her. And I think it was so out of the blue. I remember being so shocked, because she turned around, she went, yes, well, you chose to kill your baby, didn't you? And I lost mine. And I just stopped and looked at her and went, oh goodness, why would you say that? Where has that come from? And she went, well, you upset me, so I wanted to hurt you. And I went, well, you achieved that then.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Good job.
It was when our relationship had really got to its most toxic point. I think we were talking about something to do with parenting, and I'd perhaps said something along the lines of, you know, well, you didn't have that experience because you had me. And it's difficult to navigate with all of them, and you wouldn't have done that for me anyway. I'd perhaps very subtly and inadvertently, I have to say, called her out on the way she behaved when I was a child and how she acted when I was a child. And again, I would still have been in that phase where I didn't think my childhood was that bad. So I was so shocked, because any time that she would give affection, it would be stored up to be weaponized later. And that was my experience. So I'm exactly the same. I sometimes will think, God, I really wish I could have a mum hug, or I kind of miss that phase when I didn't see her for what she was, and I thought we were besties and didn't realize that what it was enmeshment and a complete engulfing of me as a person, because she's narcissistic. I still miss those times, and I still think, God, I wish I could do that, even though I knew that they were really damaging. I know now that they're really damaging and that they were toxic. I don't think it ever leaves us, because biologically we crave that affection from a caregiver, and that's what it is.
I mean, I was listening to that then thinking, I wonder actually if I've got anyone in my life that could just give me a cuddle and I'd think, actually, that'll do. maybe I don't need the mum. Maybe I just need a really good cuddle.
Maybe just
So
a
maybe
nice
I'm
hug.
just gonna. I think I might just after this just start going around and saying, "Do you fancy meeting up? I just really need a cuddle." Just to
Yeah.
test all my friends out at this point, because maybe it isn't the mum side of the cuddle. Maybe it's just feeling like you've got someone giving you that hug that means they've got your back, that they've got you, that they care for you like you didn't have as a young child, as a teenager, as a young adult. I don't think that need to be cared for ever goes away, but maybe it isn't from a mum, maybe it isn't from a caregiver at all. Maybe it's just to feel that you're looked after.
Yeah.
Because that's all I think out of everything, I still struggle now to be looked after. I've got a really very, very small group of friends, and each of those has they're very different, but they have their own way of showing me that they care. But the second it becomes prominent and obvious, I'll go, oh no, because
No, thank you.
I don't want to seem needy, or I don't want to seem like I desperately need your love. But ultimately, I am needy and I desperately need your love. So
Deep down.
if they're hearing this, I really do need your love. So please carry on. But yeah, I struggle with other people helping, and I think that will literally come back to the days where it was just me carrying the
Yeah.
family, just me making sure everybody else was okay. And I think that's going to be a hard one to turn around. I'll probably be in my 60s, suddenly be like, give me all the love, I'm
Yeah.
okay now. But right now I'm just not okay with it. I'm
Yeah.
just not okay with it. I mean, I listened to your side of everything, your story with your mum, and I think you're thinking the same thing as me. I'm not going to presume you are, but it sounds like you're going, there was moments in my childhood that I didn't realize before that were really toxic, and I'm hearing your story and thinking, goodness, if you'd realised that back in your teenage years, back in your young adulthood, I'm not saying we're, old, but back in your younger
We are a bit though,
adulthood,
aren't we? We're getting there.
push Harriet, we're nowhere near 40 yet. And and I just think, imagine if you'd have realised it that early on, would you have walked away? Because I don't know, like, I sit here and think, oh, Harriet, you're worth so much more than that conversation. You're worth so much more than the toxic childhood and teenagehood that you had. I was worth, and I still am worth more than what I went through. There's so many experiences we've both had where people looking in from the outside in would go, why didn't you walk away sooner? There are obviously those that have no clue how it feels to have gone through any of this and still think we shouldn't have done what we've done. But there are going to be people that are like, know your worth. Why didn't you walk away before now? I mean, going back many years, my wedding day, my mum left my wedding day 30 seconds, I would say, after the speeches ended to go to her local pub, and she never came back. Her daughter's wedding. And I think if someone else was telling me that, I'd go, why did you still have contact for another 10 years? What went through your mind? Why would you do that to yourself? But when you're in it, like full well as I do, when you're in it, that's normal life. That is, we've done it for this long, we've plodded along, we're going to continue to plod along, and it doesn't matter because we don't think about the detrimental effect it's going to have to us and our future. I never thought I'd be a mum going, oh, I hope I'm never like my mum. I never thought I'd be like that. I obviously have a daughter. Both of us have the younger child is the daughter. And I look at her and think, she's 9 now. 9 was the age I started to get bullied at my primary school. I was bullied from 9 to 16, so through 2 schools consistently. There wasn't a break in it. And I look at her now and she's so strong and feisty. She's like Edith.
Yeah.
They're like, I always say, it sounds terrible, but I always say, if I'd had her first, I'm not sure we'd have had a second, because oh my goodness, she's a handful. She's the best handful. She's so spirited, and I feel like, she could probably rule the world. She's that sort of child, and I was never like that. And I think, God, I hope she never loses that. But in order for her to never lose that, I have to be better. I have to be such a better parent than my own mum was, because maybe I wouldn't have been that shy and retiring, bullied child. Maybe I would have been my daughter at 9 if I'd have had that push, that backing from my parent. So I constantly say to myself, I can't be like her. I can't be like her. I'll say things or I'll do things. Oh my God, she used to do that. I know I can't do that. And is that a way to live? Is that a way that we want to conduct ourselves? Surely, I don't know. I thought maybe I would have the freedom as a parent to be the parent I wanted to be, but actually it's always tainted with don't really want to have any traits that I share with her.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we do show up as our parents sometimes. You physically cannot help it. It would be odd if we didn't, but when we do, it's terrifying. It is terrifying when you've had that really negative experience. And I did a podcast recently talking about the telephone voice and how when you are raised by a narcissist, you grow up with your telephone voice being your whole voice, because you present this image of yourself that isn't actually really you, to try and stay in favor with them. And somebody had messaged me and said it really resonated with them because they used to get shouted at a lot for any kind of accent, and their parent would be incredibly offended if they had an accent, because that was common and you needed to speak properly. That was my upbringing. That was my experience. Anytime I had an accent, it would be, and I still now, if somebody messages me like, oh, you've got such a Yorkshire accent, I'm like, oh, please don't tell me that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I have then gone on to say to my kids frequently, oh, speak properly, darling. I mean, what does that mean? They are speaking properly, but they have a twang of an accent at times. And I've recently realized that I'm doing it and had to think, okay, where does that come from? Let's catch it and change it. But the difference between our parents and us is that we realize it, and then we affect change with it. We make the choice, because that's what it is, to look at our behavior and go, actually, is that healthy? Is that normal? Or not normal, but is that healthy? And does that add anything to my parenting? Is that going to benefit my child in any way? No, actually, that's not ideal. That's not how I want to behave. Let's make a repair. Let's change that. Let's stop doing that. Whereas when you are raised by a toxic parent, you don't get that. You don't get that repair. It's a case of, oh, I've hurt you. Tough.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard. I hear you say raised by a toxic parent, and I can honestly say I probably look at it now that I wasn't raised by her at all. Like when I think like back about everything, someone will say to me, I mean, I have this joke with some of my closest friends that I'm really funny. I'll say to them, I am funny though, aren't I? That's like my best trait. And
that dark humor.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm well funny. My kids will say you're a hoot, and I'm like, I know. And but I always say to them, I get that from my dad. I'll say everything like that. I was, one of my closest friends, he says to me all the time, you're really clever, like you're very knowledgeable, and I get that from my dad. Like you're very sarcastic. I get that from my dad. And I will say that so often, but not because I'm omitting her from anything. It's because I genuinely have tried my hardest possibly not to be anything like her. Her drink of favour was vodka. And as I've got into my late 30s, Harriet, late 30s, I can only drink vodka if I'm on a night out without feeling like death the next day. I don't know if it's an age thing. Wine makes me poorly. Just, if I don't drink often, but when I go out, I'll drink. And that was my mum's drink of choice. It took me 3 years maybe to be going out with friends or, having celebrations and being able to drink vodka without thinking, oh my God, am I turning into her? Is this going to be me now? I remember, tipping vodka out and refilling half of it with water just so that she was a little bit more lucid the next day. And I didn't want ever to follow in those footsteps. There'll be times where one of my closest friends works in partnership with a very famous vodka company, so I'll get huge bottles of vodka. And I remember one of my children once saying to me, have you drunk all of that so far? And just that wave of fear coming over me, thinking, oh my goodness, he thinks I'm an alcoholic. That's my immediate dramatization. Darling, I'm not an alcoholic. God, I fancy some wine sometimes, but I don't drink that much. But there's that natural fear that you're going to be portrayed in the same way. There's those filters on TikTok that age you up, and they're like, this is what you're going to look like. And then people are like, oh my God, I look like my dad, I look like my mum. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do them. I'm too scared. I want to look like my mum. And there's just that level of fear all the time that I'm going to follow in her footsteps in the worst way.
Even down to those silly things, like you say, the TikTok filter. I'll sometimes look at my face and I'll be like, oh fucking hell. Oh, I could see bits of her. God. And funnily enough, growing up, my mum would say to me quite often, oh, you look like your dad. Never mind, darling, we'll buy you pretty clothes. Because she hated him so much. And it was a bit of a running joke, but actually looking back at it now, God, it was so sinister and so horrible to say to a child. But when you do see your parent or you have those scars and you recognize them and you think, oh God, am I like them? Or do I look like that? It's really difficult. So difficult.
And it's silly. It's just very, I mean, it's very picky. It's just silly, isn't it? Saying, oh, I hope I don't look like my mum. Because that's just, to me, if someone said that about my children, I hope you don't look like your mum, that'd be really hurtful. But I just feel like you kept your mouth shut for so long, Gemma. You know, there's sometimes, like you were saying one of your podcasts before about that dark humour. If anyone else heard you talking like that, they'd be like, whoa, that's your mum. You need to calm yourself down, watch what you're saying. But if you've lived through this stuff, if you've grown up in a toxic household, in any experience, I mean, I don't know if there are going to be other people who haven't, there probably will be, you know, I don't think there'd be anybody else with an alcoholic parent that they had cut off from their lives until they listened to Helen's podcast episode. And so there might be someone out there who's done exactly the same thing as me, whose parents split and they took on the role of caregiver to their siblings and struggled through. And there might be someone else out there, but ultimately, unless you've lived that serious toxic childhood, I don't think you have the right or the understanding or empathy to turn around and say, that's a bit dark, that humour's a bit dark. You probably shouldn't say that about your mum. Well, you know, I could come back and say, well, she probably shouldn't have neglected me and my siblings, but you know, swings and roundabouts. I don't think you can have an opinion on it. Freedom of speech, I'm here for it, but I don't think you can have a serious opinion on something that you don't have any understanding or experience in. These podcasts are so important because not only do they tell people like me that I'm not on my own. I just remember sitting there listening to Helen's podcast going, oh my God, this is me. Like, this woman is living my life, and just being so overwhelmed with there was someone else out there that had lived such a close related experience to me, that although I hope no one else ever lived my experience, I also do a little bit and I hope they hear this, because then they've had that same experience. I want someone else to be going to their screaming at their phone going, oh my goodness, Gemma's experience is just like mine. I'm not on my own. And then I hope anyone else who hasn't had that experience and who hasn't lived through anything like this takes away from this podcast that these things are happening. And so to cut a parent off it's not done lightly. It's not done overnight. It's not done because you're bored. It's not done because you've got no plans for Thursday. It's not like that. It's done after years and years of fighting through the toxicity, fighting through the negativity, fighting through the fact that parent really doesn't want to change, quite clearly doesn't want to change. And then having to make a decision that is going to affect your family, you, for the rest of your life. This isn't going to be something that ever goes away, regardless of how much you think you've cut that tie. It's never going to go away. This isn't a decision made lightly. And I think it's the biggest message that comes out of a podcast like this is that if you think it did come lightly, you need to listen to these again and again to understand that absolutely isn't the case.
Yeah, very much so. Did you mentioned there about impacting your family. Did your children have much contact with your mum at any point?
My son did for the first maybe 4 or 5 years of his life, but it was very sporadic. So she would come in and go out and come in and go out of his life quite a lot. Like it wouldn't be, she would leave it so long that he wouldn't remember her. I'd show him pictures and say, who's this? And he'd be like, well, I don't know. To the extent that I would be saying, that's nanny, that's your nanny. And he, no, nothing. And so it got to the stage where I'd say, that's mummy's mummy, isn't it? Do you remember, that's my mummy, that's mummy's mummy? And he'd go, mummy's mummy. And then she'd come and he'd go, mummy's mummy. And she'd be like, why is he calling me that? I'm like, well, how else do you explain to a 5-6-year-old that this person he doesn't recognize is coming in and that's his nanny? Because his nanny is the woman that's been there at his birth. You know, my ex-husband's mum, that's his nanny. That's the nanny that showed up, that proved what a nanny should be, that earned that title, that's his nanny. So if I then this woman turns up and I say that's your nanny, he's going to be no, it's not, I don't know who this woman is. So it was just easier to say that's mummy's mummy, and she hated that. She would
Yeah.
ask constantly. It would be a cycle. It would be turning up, mummy's mummy, a few weeks in, can you call me nanny? No, you have to earn that. Disappear again because she wasn't happy with that answer, come back, mummy's mummy, and it would go round and round and round until the day my daughter was born. And she knew that I was never going to allow that. That's an earned title. She's my mum. That's her title. She's the lady who gave birth to me. That's her title. She earned the title of mum, or birth mum, biological mum, whatever the title would be, because she gave birth to me. However, that title is now not part of my life, because that title ended when she stopped being a mum, when she stopped being able to care for me. So I was never going to let my children get used to calling her nanny, when nanny meant something so completely different to her, to what she was.
And does your eldest have any memories of her or any experiences?
Not one. He's
No.
13 now, so not one memory. I saw her a year and a half ago on a bus while I was with my children, and I remember just whacking my son and going, that's my mum over there, because he's obviously at an age where he does understand. Both of them I don't hide things from. They've literally asked me this morning, are we allowed to listen to the podcast episode? And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely fine, because they know all of this anyway. But he'll say things like, are you okay? Do you want to get off the bus? And I'm okay. I'm okay, because I went through a stage of, I didn't want her seeing them, even in passing in the street, because you didn't earn any right to see them. And then there was a day all of a sudden where we saw her, and I was just like, no, we'll get off the bus when we're getting off the bus. And if she sees you, she sees what she's missing. I'm not missing out. You're not missing out. She's missing out. So he has no recollection of her, no recollection of anything. I mean, there wasn't much she did really to make him remember anything. There's no huge experiences he had with her. My daughter is obviously a lot younger. She's never had one meeting with her, never seen her ever, because obviously we cut ties on the day she was born 9.5 years ago. She just says, we don't talk to your mummy, do we? And I say no. She says, that's because she's not a nice person, isn't it? And that in a nutshell is exactly what I need them to know.
Yeah.
You know, if there's anything, I will never lie. If they ask a question, I'll never lie. But ultimately the basis of it is, yes, she's not a nice person. She's not what we need in our lives. So
there's something to be said for being open and honest with them and saying to them in its simplest form, she's not somebody that we need in our lives because of her behavior and how she treats us. Because I think there's real power in explaining to children that just because you love someone, or just because you've had a blood tie with them, or any kind of relationship tie with them, does not mean that they have a right to treat you in a way that crosses your boundaries or that treats you poorly. They don't. Nobody has that right. Absolutely nobody has that right.
You know, you could be the closest to family and make a huge mistake that cuts those ties. It doesn't give you fast track access to our lives. It doesn't enable you to go, well, I'm their grandmother, or I'm the paternal or maternal grandmother. That's not how this works. And I don't know if it's more, I mean, your whole podcast surrounds itself around not only parental estrangement, but also in the digital age. And we are in a situation, you've got a teen as well. They have phones now. It turns out that they know a lot more than we think they do. And I'm terrified as it is. So when they've got access to social media and they've got access to messages and things like this, you don't know what's going to be said, and that they're going to have to come to you one day and say, why didn't you tell me that? So instead of that becoming the day, I want to be open and honest with them, and also give them that knowledge that, you know, we all may have blood ties, we may be your parents, but we need to continue to try and be your parents. We don't just say, well, I gave birth to you, therefore I have a fast track to the rest of your life. You know, if I mess up, you call me out on that and we'll sort that out. I'm not going to say, well, I can do that because I'm your mother. That's not the life we're going to have. And unfortunately, that was the life I had. So I don't want to repeat that.
Yeah, and I get that quite a lot, where people will say to you, oh, wait until your children cut you off. And I'm like,
they won't.
They won't.
Because I'm going to do better.
Yeah, and because if I do mess up, I'm willing to be accountable for that and make a change. That's the difference. I'd be willing to address my behavior that had caused them harm. I would validate their feelings. You know, I frequently will say to Ruben, and this particular week has been really hard with Ruben, he's my eldest, because he's been really hormonal. He's been feeling very agitated and frustrated for no apparent reason. We've talked about it and said to him, you know, what's going on for you? And then he'll say to me, you're making me really angry now because you're doing this. And I'll say to him, that's perfectly okay. Doesn't change the outcome. You've still got to do your homework, my guy. But I get how you're feeling. And he'll say to me, will you stop talking to me like that? And I'll say, okay, I'm getting cross with you. I apologize for raising my voice. I am feeling frustrated now as well. So you can understand where I'm coming from. Let's sit down and talk about this. And yeah, sometimes it takes a lot longer. And I'm not saying we do it every time, because sometimes you're just like, I have got other shit to do. Do your homework.
Shut up and get on with your homework.
Do your bloody homework. That's normal. But it's in actually sitting and meeting each other and having those conversations of mutual respect. And no, you're not going to sit down with a 2-year-old and be like, right, darling, I am feeling frustration and I understand you are too. Because that's not reality. But you can verbalize your emotions and say, look, it's okay that you're really cross right now. I'm getting cross right now. I'm going to walk away for a minute and come back and we'll talk about it. Even at the smallest of ages, you can still verbalize those feelings and help them to understand where you're coming from. And that's what I didn't have growing up. That's what you didn't have growing up. It's that accountability.
Do you think that is indicative of a digital age or in the generation that we're currently in? Because I'm thinking about it, I don't remember you. I do the same as you. You know, I get how you're feeling. My son especially is he's very in touch with his emotions and hormones. So he'll say to me, I am feeling very frustrated and I don't know why. So what I'm going to do is put it down to hormones, mummy. I think I'm probably just hormonal. And I'm like, aces, get to your room, have a minute, come back when you're done. But I don't remember anyone caregiver wise, grandparents, parents at the teenagers age having conversations like that with me. And I wonder if that is something that has evolved over generations, so we don't necessarily put it down to neglect or like I do where my parent just didn't ever have that conversation with me. Maybe it just wasn't the done thing. We're in an age now where mental health and emotions, feelings, they're all becoming a bit more prevalent and you're getting a bit more educated on it now because of the digital age that we're in. So I wonder if we like that as parents, not only because we didn't have it as children, but also because it's able to be discussed a lot more now in the generation and the digital age that we're in.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, I mean, if emotions were discussed when I was a child, it was almost like they were a mocked thing, like they were a weakness.
You wouldn't turn around to your parent and say, I'm feeling really frustrated, mummy. They'd be like, stop talking silly.
Yeah,
like
my mum used to say, my mum used to say to me, if I'd say, I'm just really stressed, what have you got to be stressed for? I'm like, I don't know, maybe because you're a fucking twat. That's what I've got to be stressed for. Like, I don't know. What do you want from me? I should probably edit that out. But I don't know what, like, how do you say to a child, what have you got to be stressed for? Because you might feel like they haven't got anything to be stressed for, but their stress is just because they're different to yours doesn't mean that they're not valid. Children can feel stress, children can feel frustration, children can feel anger, and all of those things are valid. But when we were growing up, it was very much a case of children should be seen, not heard. Children should be, they don't have feelings, they don't have needs. I mean, up until maybe in the last 50 years, we didn't even acknowledge from a psychology point of view that children had needs. Actual needs, emotional needs. We just were like, they're just there.
Yeah,
they're just there.
Yeah,
they're growing up.
Just they'll be fine. They're just children. It's all fine. What have they got? And I think that what have they got to worry about? That is a huge generational change, isn't it? Because now I think, well, personally, I'm so much more aware of children's mental health. I mean, I've come from both my parents were in school jobs, so my father is still is like a welfare officer of a school. My mum was what they call a catering assistant, it's a dinner lady. She's a dinner lady. She's not anymore. She lost her job based on her behaviour.
Right.
I also have come from a school background as well up until last year. I worked with special needs children in schools as well. And honestly, what I've taken from my time, only 3 years in school background really, but I've taken from that is that children's mental health is still so lacking, especially in schools. There's not enough. I mean, there was none of it when we were growing up. There was no talk of it because, like you say, that thing you just said about, well, they're just children, what have they got to worry about? We're still struggling to get help for adults in this country. The level of help for mental health in adults is still lacking, in my opinion. So I'm then very aware now that my children have mental health needs as well, because I didn't have that, and I'm aware that I should have had that. We all should have had that. And I think if anything has come from this, it's the fact that no, children won't just be children. It's not, they're just children, what have they got to worry about? It's not that. It's, life is hard. And yeah, it's great that they find this out early on, but they also need to be given the tools to then evolve from that, learn from that, and give that to then the next generation that they may have, that they may go on to have. Because I definitely didn't have anyone listen to my feelings, which is probably, it goes back to, why didn't you tell your dad what was going on? Why didn't you tell the school you were being bullied? Probably because I knew there would be no help. There wouldn't be.
Some
I mean, my dad,
subconscious level.
yeah, my dad was going through his own mental health stuff. I wouldn't have put that on him. You know, subconsciously, you know, there's not going to be the help you need, and you're just going to pile on more pressure to people that don't necessarily have the tools to deal with it. So you just get on with it, and that's definitely what I don't want for my children. I want to break that. I want to break that generational trauma of not having anyone that listens, not having that parental figure that can get you through even the smallest amount of stress and doesn't just dismiss it as, oh, it'll be fine, you're a child, what have you got to be stressed about? I don't want that for my children. And in saying that, I didn't even have that conversation with my mum as a child. I keep sitting here trying to think of experiences where I felt affection or I felt support. I couldn't give you one example, not one. Is that really what I want for my children? Absolutely not. I want them to feel like I was always there. You know, no, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had love in abundance and support in abundance. And that's, you know, I didn't have anything growing up, and I don't want them to have that.
Do you feel when you look back at it, and this is so common with parentified children, that you didn't have the love, the affection, and you can't name one instance where you were given that care, but can you name several where you gave it to her?
Yes.
Yeah. Because you took on the role of being the parent and being the adult. And that's what we have with parentified children. And it's so difficult because you then become the parent for your caregiver, whether it be emotionally or physically.
Kelly Clarkson song, Because of You.
Yeah.
And it used to be Kelly Clarkson's one of my all-time favorite humans. And that song, I used to love that song. And then all of a sudden one day, there's toward the end of the song, I think she says something along the lines of, I'm going to get this wrong now, but she said something along the lines of, I was so young, you should have known better than to lean on me. And I now, since hearing those words and going, oh, no, I can't listen to this song anymore, because that is it in its entirety. Is I'm 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, doesn't matter what age, I'm a child, and you should have known better than to choose to fall apart yourself and neglect your children. And I just had to do what I had to do, but I never should have had to do it. I never should have had to do that. I never should have lost an entire childhood because she chose alcohol, or she chose to disappear, basically, to become the child. And that's not fair. And I hate saying that. I say this a lot at the moment, and I'm driving myself mad with it. But I keep saying it's not fair. That's not fair, because it's not. And I hate saying it because it's such a broad sentence to say, but it isn't. What she did was not fair, and I've given her more than enough chances to. It's not even an apology that's needed. It's just an understanding. Jesus,
to validate
Jemma,
you.
Yeah, Jesus, Jemma, I saw what you did there. God, I know my kids would have been taken away if it hadn't been for you. You know, anything like that. But my dad always says, don't assume people are going to do things based on what you would do. So that would be what I would do if I'm in the wrong, and I know I'm in the wrong. I'll say, look, I'm so sorry. Like, I will apologize. I'm not afraid of apology. I'm not afraid of understanding that I've gone wrong and learning from that. And my dad's right, you shouldn't assume that everyone's going to think the same way that you do, because you're going to be waiting forever. Do you think you're ever going to get an apology from your mother based on her behaviour?
Oh God, no. My mum thinks that I'm in the wrong and that I'm the bad guy. And even down to my dad's family, they still, and I've mentioned before on the podcast, getting messages from his adopted daughter, they feel that I'm either lumped in with my mum or I'm just totally misguided when I talk about his behavior. So, no, absolutely not. Not a single adult. When my dad's still alive, he would still refuse to be accountable. His wife would refuse to be accountable. And so would my mum. Not a single adult in my life would ever have been accountable. And I think, or apologized, or even just validated how I felt. I'm sorry that was the way that you felt during that experience, that was how I made you feel. It wasn't my intention. And I am sad that that's how our behaviors made you feel. That's validation. But it would be, oh, I'm sorry you felt that way, but you got it wrong.
Yeah, it's not even the words "I'm sorry." It's I say to my children all the time when they say like "I'm sorry," I'm like, I don't need to hear it. What I need to do is see it. I need to see you're sorry. I need to see that changed behavior based on what you've done that isn't okay, that isn't acceptable. And I think coming to terms with the fact you're never going to get that validation, you're never going to get any form of an apology or acceptance from that other person is probably the biggest hurdle in all of this. Because you feel like you're entitled. I feel like I'm entitled to an apology, or entitled to at least have validation over what I went through, but I'm never going to get that. So that is one of the biggest hurdles that you have to jump through, is knowing that that's never going to happen.
Yeah, and it's that healthy entitlement, that healthy recognition of what you do deserve. It's like you're entitled to be paid at work. You're entitled to have people respect your boundaries. You're entitled to have that validation and that changed behavior and apology for how you were treated. Absolutely. But you're never going to get it.
Do you think you've come to terms with the fact you're never going to get it?
Yeah, I think so. For the most part. I think so for the most part, because
But do you still feel like you're entitled to it?
Oh yeah. But I also, in the same way, I also don't really want it, because it won't change anything. I'm never going to be accepting of my mum being in my life at this point. I've know too much of her behaviors and of the patterns. It's just not going to be a position that I'm going to put myself or my children in. So at this point, I'm not even sure that I particularly want it. I've made my peace with that's how my childhood and my adulthood was. I don't need anything else from that.
I think a lot of it is self-validation.
Yes.
I think a lot of it is, actually, no, I know what I did. I know I did okay. I know I wasn't in the wrong. With me, obviously, in my experience, I know I looked after those children and kept them safe, and, made sure that we weren't removed from the home, we weren't taken into care. I know I did everything I possibly could to keep that family together. And I know that it's not affected me in the sense that I'm a bad parent for it or a bad person for it. I take what I've done, and I know what I've done to be the right thing at that time for me and my family. And I know now that what I do for my children now, I know I'm a damn good mum. And I think I don't have a lot of confidence in myself. I don't have a lot of confidence in my abilities. I'm constantly getting told by close friends, you can do this, you've got this. Even the podcast today, you said to me, do you want to just be read out anonymously, or do you want to come on the pod? And I was thinking, okay, but hang on a minute, can I do it? And I'll sort of think I can't do it. And the one thing I have the most confidence in my entire life is that I'm a damn good mum. And that is based on knowing what a damn crap mum looks like, and knowing that that's not me, and that's never going to be me. I'd use my last breath to make sure I'm being the best mum I could be. And if I take nothing else away from my life, if I don't end up with, a career in writing or photography or anything else I dream of doing, I know that I'm a good mum. And I know that I can go to my grave knowing that, but she can't. So maybe that's the self-validation I needed, rather than having it from somebody else.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. Honestly, it's been so insightful. And I have every faith that just hearing these stories of lived experiences is going to be helpful for other people and help them know that they are not alone, because no matter what you think, you are never alone in your own experience. They might all look
Absolutely.
slightly different. We might all have different takes on them. Each experience might be unique, but you're never alone in it. You're never the only person that's experienced that feeling, that emotion. And I'm really grateful to you for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yes, I can do. That's
Okay.
thrown me for a second there. So I am Rose and Honey Photography on Instagram. I'm just trying to get the photography out there, Harriet. There's no writing at the moment. I'm still trying to jump that hurdle after stopping for so long, but photography is very much my passion at the moment. So Rose and Honey Photography on Instagram.
Amazing. And I will link that up in the bio so that anybody who wants to go and have a look or who is in need of some photography at the minute can come and find you and check you out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on here. And thank you for listening, guys. I will be back again next week with another episode of Unfollowing Mum. I've been Harriet Shearsmith, and together we are Unfollowing Mum.